This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. Nina Parker, 36 years old, is a successful entrepreneur in the handcrafted jewelry industry. She built a strong online business, but her life is turned upside down when she receives a letter from her husband, David, who has left her after 12 years of marriage. "I'm done with you and your boring life. I'm taking everything and selling this house. Enjoy what's left," the letter reads. Faced with this shock, Nina doesn't crumble. Instead, she decides to do something David never expected: fight for herself and everything she has built. Nina's story is a journey of recovery, not just about assets, but about the freedom and inner strength she finds within herself. The note on my kitchen counter hit me like a slap across the face. My hands trembled as I read the cruel words scrawled in David's messy handwriting on the back of our electric bill. "I'm done with you and your boring life. I'm taking everything, and this house is sold, by the way. Enjoy what's left." Shock, hurt, and anger flooded me. But strangely, what surfaced most was a calm, unwavering sense of determination. I pulled out my phone and typed a simple response. "Saw your note. Thanks for the heads up." That was it. It was time to face the reality that the man I had spent 12 years of my life with was gone. Just like that. I never imagined that at 36, I would be standing in my kitchen reading a goodbye note from my husband of 12 years. I'm Nina Parker, an entrepreneur who built a successful online business selling handcrafted jewelry. David had always dismissed my business as a little hobby, something I did in my spare time, something not worth taking seriously. Looking back, I should have seen the signs: the late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls, the way he quickly closed his laptop when I entered the room. But I wasn't as naive as he thought. 6 months ago, while paying our bills, I noticed large sums of money being transferred out of our joint account into an account I didn't recognize. When I casually mentioned it to David, he brushed it off as business investments. But that was the moment I knew. I had to protect myself. I started documenting everything: the unexplained expenses, the suspicious phone calls, and the nights he claimed to be working late, but the office building was dark when I drove by. I opened a separate bank account and gradually moved my personal savings there. But 3 months ago, while having coffee with my sister Janet, who worked at the same bank David used for his business accounts, she hesitated before speaking. "Janet, I've seen something concerning. Large withdrawals, suspicious transfers." She paused, gripping my hand. "Nina, I think he's planning something. You need to protect yourself." Her words changed everything. I started paying attention to the details I had ignored before: the way David always insisted on handling our finances, the mysterious business trips he couldn't explain, and the whispered phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. That was when I reached out to Sarah, my best friend from college, who was now a successful divorce attorney. Over lunch, she listened intently as I laid out my concerns. Then she gave me a hard look. "Shelby, you're smarter, more successful, and stronger than you realize. Stop playing checkers, Nina. Start playing chess." I listened to her advice. While David thought I was busy with my little hobby, I started preparing for the inevitable. I documented every suspicious transaction, every unexplained absence, and every lie he told. I kept my plans quiet, maintained my routine, and played the role of the trusting wife while secretly preparing for the storm I knew was coming. The day after I found David's note, I received an email from our real estate agent, Marcus. The subject line read, "Urgent house sale documentation required." My heart skipped a beat as I opened the email and discovered that David had tried to list our house for sale. But there was one problem: he couldn't proceed without my signature. It was a huge mistake on his part. During our home renovation, I had refinanced the house solely in my name, something David was too distracted by his investments to notice. When he casually told me to handle the meeting with the bank, he had signed a power of attorney, assuming I'd always handle things for him. I called Marcus immediately. "Hey, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I haven't authorized any sale of the property." Marcus was uncomfortable as he explained that David had been insistent about selling the house immediately. Marcus. David seemed sure everything was already handled, but apparently there's a problem. That was the moment I knew for sure. His arrogance had become his biggest mistake. The next morning, David's text came pouring in. He demanded answers, growing more frustrated as his plans unraveled. I was in my office finalizing some jewelry orders when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find David standing on the porch, his face flushed with anger. David, pushing past me. What did you do? Marcus says I can't sell the house without your signature. This isn't how this was supposed to go. I crossed my arms, standing my ground. Nina, did you like how you handled my business accounts? The ones you've been secretly siphoning money from? David's face paled, but he quickly recovered. He scoffed. Oh, David, I made a few investments for our future. You wouldn't understand. You just play with beads all day. Shining calmly. Actually, I understand perfectly. You've been siphoning money from our joint accounts. You tried to sell a house that's only in my name, and you thought I wouldn't notice any of it. David's expression shifted from anger to confusion. Slowly, realization began to dawn on him. Shiranto, remember that refinancing paperwork you were too busy to read? The renovation meeting you couldn't be bothered to attend? Well, it's mine now, David. The house is mine. Just like the business you thought was just a hobby. The one that's now worth more than your annual salary. David sank onto the couch, his arrogance deflating. David, you can't do this to me. Nina, I already have. You're going to leave my house, and my lawyer will be contacting you about the divorce proceedings. And those funds you transferred? We'll be discussing those too. David tried to regain his composure, standing up straight and adjusting his tie. David, you don't have the resources or the knowledge to fight me on this. I walked to my desk and pulled out a thick folder. Laying it on the table, I opened it, revealing document after document. Nina, you mean like these bank statements showing systematic withdrawals from our joint accounts? Or these emails you accidentally left open on our shared iPad discussing your plans to leave? Or maybe you'd like to see the private investigator's report about your business trips to Vegas. David's face grew paler with every revelation. Weekly, you hired a private investigator? No, David, Sarah did. You remember Sarah, right? My coffee friend who you never took seriously? She's also one of the best divorce attorneys in the state. David staggered back, pacing the room. He muttered to himself, David, this isn't how this was supposed to go. You were supposed to beg me to stay, to accept whatever crumbs I decided to leave you. Nana, that's not happening. I've already frozen our joint accounts, and legally I have the right to every penny you've siphoned off. The house isn't going anywhere, and my business, that was never yours to take in the first place. David's phone buzzed, and I saw the color drain from his face. David, your lawyer? She's filing for divorce? Nina put her sister. Yes, and she's also requesting an emergency hearing about the funds you transferred. We have records of everything, David. Every transaction, every lie. David slumped in onto the couch, defeated. He was done. The man who had thought he could control everything was now powerless, trapped in his own web of lies. David's face turned pale as he absorbed the gravity of the situation. He had been outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and now he was on the verge of losing everything. His once confident demeanor crumbled as I laid out the evidence of his lies, his deceit, and his reckless manipulation. Wow, David, almost whispering in disbelief, you really think you can get away with this? You're nothing without me. You never were. His words, full of venom and frustration, didn't faze me. He had underestimated me for too long. But what he said next made the air feel colder. David, his voice low, shaking with rage, you took everything from me. The house, the money, I worked for everything, and you think you can just take it all? You'll regret this, Nina. I'll make sure of it. There was a dangerous edge to his voice now, one I hadn't heard before. He was no longer just angry or regretful. He was desperate. And in his desperation, I knew he was capable of anything. As I turned to walk away, my phone rang. It was Sarah, calling me for the final step in the process. But before I could pick up, David suddenly lunged forward. David, grabbing my arm violently. You think you're so clever? You think you've beaten me? I'll show you what happens to women who think they can walk away from me. He tried to shove me into the wall, his eyes wild with rage. For a moment, I was caught off guard. His usual arrogance and dismissiveness had shifted into something darker, something dangerous. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to pull away from his grip, but his hand tightened, pulling me back. Nina yelled at the gasping, trying to free herself. David, stop! Let go of me! But he wasn't listening. His face contorted with frustration, and his breath was heavy, shallow. It was clear to me now, he wasn't just angry. He was furious, consumed with a rage that had turned to something much darker. David, with a cold sneer. You took my life, Nina. You made me look like a fool. You think I'll let you walk away with everything? No, not this time. I was struggling now, fear creeping into my chest. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I needed to get out. I needed to find a way to escape. But before I could think, his hand slipped into his coat pocket. My heart stopped as I realized what he was reaching for. A gun. I didn't hesitate. Instinct kicked in. In one swift motion, I pushed him off me with all the strength I could muster, knocking him off balance just enough to free myself from his grasp. David, stumbling backward, still furious. You can't escape me, Nina. You won't get away with this. I sprinted toward the door, my pulse racing, my mind consumed by one thought. Escape. The gunshot rang out as I reached for the door handle, narrowly missing me. I gasped, feeling the heat of the bullet pass by. My heart thundered in my chest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't afford to. I managed to throw open the door, slamming it behind me as I rushed out into the street, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My neighbor, hearing the commotion, rushed out to help. Neighbor, yelling, trying to grab my arm. Nina, what happened? What's going on? I didn't answer. There was no time to explain. I couldn't even look back. I just ran. I ran toward my car, throwing open the door and speeding off into the night, my mind spinning with everything that had just happened. Whoa. The days following the confrontation were a blur of police reports, frantic phone calls, and late nights filled with worry. David had gone underground, disappearing without a trace after the incident. He had always been good at hiding things, but this time, he couldn't hide from his own actions. I went to the police, but I was careful with my story. They could see the marks on my arm from his grip, but they needed proof. Sarah, already on alert, had begun to prepare for a different kind of battle, a legal one. We had already been gathering evidence against David, and now his violent outburst only strengthened our case. As Sarah worked tirelessly, I focused on rebuilding what I had fought for. My business, my peace of mind, my life. The attacks on me were no longer physical. Now they were legal, and David was making his move, trying to fight back, trying to take what he thought was still his. But he had no idea what he was up against. I wasn't the same woman he had left behind. I had learned how to fight for what was mine, and I wasn't going to stop now. The investigation into David's violent outbursts, coupled with the evidence of his financial misconduct, finally turned the tide in my favor. He was arrested, charged with multiple offenses, including attempted assault and financial fraud. The house remained mine, the business flourished, and for the first time, I felt a sense of true freedom. I remember standing in my studio one afternoon looking around at the thriving business I had built and the strong woman I had become. It wasn't just the success of my jewelry business or the relief of knowing I had escaped danger. It was the realization that I had fought for myself against all odds. Sarah stood beside me, offering her usual reassuring smile. You did it, Nina. You saved yourself. Wait, yes, I did, and I'm not going back. As I looked at the new chapter of my life unfolding, I knew that I had become the person I was always meant to be, strong, independent, and unbreakable. And no one, not even David, could take that away from me. For days after the incident, I barely slept, haunted by the sound of the gunshot and the image of David's face contorted in rage. Despite the police investigation and the temporary peace of his disappearance, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. David wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat quietly. I knew he would come for what he thought was his, but I wouldn't let him take anything from me again. Sarah was in my corner, always there, a solid pillar of support. She kept reminding me to stay calm, to wait for the legal process to unfold, but the tension in the air was palpable. I couldn't rest until I knew David was truly out of the picture. 3 weeks passed before I received a letter from my attorney. The subject line simply read, "Urgent, David's next move." I opened it quickly, my stomach dropping as I read the contents. David had made a deal with his lawyer, and it looked like he was planning to contest the divorce. Not only that, but he had also requested an emergency hearing to challenge the ownership of the house, claiming that I had coercively refinanced the property without his full understanding and consent. It was clear David wasn't just trying to take control of his life back. He was trying to destroy mine. Marcia, on the phone, her voice grim. Are you ready for this, Nina? He's going to use every trick in the book. You need to hold firm. Don't let him make you doubt yourself again. I took a deep breath and nodded. Though Sarah couldn't see me, I had already prepared myself for this moment. I had the evidence, I had the support, and I was ready. The day of the hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom with my head held high, dressed in a tailored suit, my jewelry shining like the armor it had become. I was no longer the woman David had thought of as just a hobbyist. I was a force to be reckoned with. Yeah. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. David sat across from me, his eyes narrowed, his arrogance still intact despite the situation. His lawyer, a well-dressed, slick character, stood beside him, ready to argue his case. David's lawyer, to the judge with confidence. Your Honor, the defendant claims the house was refinanced solely in her name, but the truth is that Mr. Parker was never properly informed about these transactions. He was misled and coerced into signing papers he didn't fully understand. The lawyer's words were smooth, rehearsed, but I wasn't afraid. I knew what I had. I stood up steady as I prepared to present the truth. Yeah, addressing the judge, voice calm but resolute. Your Honor, I have all the documents, including the signed power of attorney, the bank statements, and the email trails showing that David had full access to all of our financial dealings. There was no coercion, only neglect. I took the necessary steps to protect myself when I realized that my husband was acting in bad faith. I saw David's face flicker with panic as I presented the evidence, each document more damning than the last. The judge's expression was unreadable as he flipped through the pages I handed over. It was clear that David's attempts to undermine me were falling apart. The hearing went on for hours, but I held my ground. As the session ended, the judge ruled in my favor, ordering the immediate suspension of David's claim on the house and reinforcing my rights to the assets we had previously shared. That night, I sat in my office reviewing the final documents when I heard a knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who it was. David stood in the doorway, his posture stiff and defeated, but there was still a trace of arrogance in his eyes. He had been to the courthouse, but he hadn't won. And now he was here, standing in the space that used to belong to both of us. David, trying to regain some dignity. You think you've won? You think this is over? You can't keep everything, Nina. You'll never have the life you think you can. I looked up at him, my face unreadable. I had seen this man, this shell of who he once was, reduced to someone barely recognizable. His face, once confident and proud, now showed nothing but frustration and defeat. Shina, standing up, voice steady. No, David, I don't just think I've won. I've earned it. And you've lost. You lost because you underestimated me. You thought I would break. But look at me now. Look at everything you left behind. I'm not the same woman you walked away from. I'm stronger. I'm not broken. And I'm never going to apologize for taking control of my own life. I walked past him, heading toward the front door, but paused for just a moment to make one final point. Twinta, leave. You've already taken everything you could. Now, just go. David didn't say anything else. His shoulders slumped as he turned and walked out the door, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the empty space that used to be our home. I closed the door behind him and stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle in. It was over. The game was finished, and I had come out victorious. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my jewelry business. I expanded my product line, launched a new website, and hired a team of skilled artisans to help bring my vision to life. Everything I had once been afraid to do, everything David had told me I wasn't capable of, I was now achieving. The house, once filled with tension and resentment, became a sanctuary. I redecorated it, turning every room into a reflection of who I had become, strong, independent, and unapologetically successful. And with every passing day, I found myself getting stronger. I ran workshops for other women, helping them discover their own strength and creativity. The women who attended my workshops shared their stories, their struggles, their dreams, stories that reminded me of my own journey, of the woman I had been and the woman I had become. And 6 months after the court ruling, I received a letter from David's sister. She told me he was still struggling to rebuild his life, that he had finally admitted to her how much he regretted underestimating me. I felt no satisfaction in that. I didn't need his regret. What mattered was that I had taken control of my own life. What mattered was that I had learned how strong I truly was. And that was something no one, not even David, could take away from me. I looked around my studio, the sun streaming in through the windows, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. David's note had been the catalyst for my transformation. But it wasn't the end he had hoped for. It was just the beginning. Thank you for following Nina's story. This story is not just about recovery from pain, but also about the journey of rediscovering personal strength. Nina showed that no matter how challenging life can get, if we stand firm and don't give up, we can rise stronger than ever. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Together, we can learn and find strength from stories like this.